You may hit a certain age and think you're too old to make a difference. Your chance to make a real impact has passed, and your skills just aren't cutting it anymore. Well, our interview today on Grieving Out Loud is here to flip that script. It's a reminder that age is just a number, and the power to make a difference, it doesn't punch a time clock.
God teaches me different things every minute. This is one of the most important minutes.
In his early 60s, Neil Jackson received the kind of news no one wants to hear. Doctors diagnosed him with a rare form of cancer, coupled with the daunting odds of a 1 in a million chance of surviving a risky, life-saving surgery. But that is not where his story ends. In the aftermath, Neil found himself grappling with another challenge, an addiction to the painkillers prescribed by his doctors.
There was one day there that I had a whisper in my heart. It's an emotional whisper. That whisper said, Neil, you need to end the use of your drugs, because I had been in such a depressed state that life had no meaning.
Now, Neil is using his painful experiences to help others battling substance use disorder, not only by telling his story, but also through a unique invention. I'm Angela Kennecke, and this is Grieving Out Loud. Well, Neil, welcome to Grieving Out Loud. I am so glad that you could join us.
It's really my honor. I feel blessed to be on with you today. So I've listened to your podcast before and quite a learning experience. So I'm humbled to be here. So I'm dedicated to doing whatever I can to help you get your message, help me get my message, to get the word out. I mean, it's just so many of us out here that are hurting.
Yeah, that's all we can do is to try to, partner with each other, join hands, and to try to help other people. And the more we talk about it and the more we learn about it and the more we try to problem solve together, I think the more likely we will come up with better solutions to this horrible epidemic we find ourselves in. It's an epidemic that Neil never thought would touch his life. For 7 decades, he never struggled with substance use disorder or even experimented with drugs. But then in 2011, something changed. Neil began suffering from troubling health systems, and his life took an unexpected turn.
At that point, I was 172 pounds. I was 60 years old. I was having a uncomfortable feeling as I flew around the globe working for E-Trade Financial. I was in charge of their global audit division. But it was just being uncomfortable, and I couldn't figure out what was going on. The final diagnosis was a rare cancer called chondrosarcoma, which is a cancer of the soft tissue. It had grown in huge proportions at the base of my spine. At 8.5 pounds was the tumor that they took out.
Wow.
Yeah. And I was hospitalized for 11 months at Mass General. I went from 172 to 102. I had probably the best chondrosarcoma surgeon in the world and a team of 7 from all the chiefs that were going to work with me. There were 7 surgeons, chief surgeons in the operating room for a total of 23 hours.
Just surviving that surgery was nothing short of a miracle. Neil says doctors told him he had a 1 in a million chance. Thankfully, Neil defied the odds, but then came an incredible amount of pain.
And they said I was a chronic pain patient, so they were putting me on, started with morphine, went to Oxycontin, hydromorphine, and then we went on to fentanyl. Fentanyl was oral at first, and it just destroyed my digestive system, so we went to the patches. I was taking those patches every 72 hours, replacing them. By the first, 2 years into it, I was at 48 hours replacing. So my temperament for opioids was growing. My demand for it was exceeding any expectations the doctor could control. They didn't know if I was telling them the truth or not, where my pain level was. I really didn't have much pain. I just wanted more drugs.
Let's talk about that for a minute. When you were in pain, and I'm guessing you were in pain after the surgery, was the
Yeah.
pain in your back?
Yeah, it was at the base of my spine. They had to remove a full section called the sacrum,
Oh,
and my total pelvis. That was replaced with an artificial pelvis, and my left hip was replaced. So after all that, I had a real trip on pain. There's no doubt about it.
and tell me, at the time, and this is more than a decade ago,
Yeah, 2012.
2012. So I think that the prescribing practices back then too, people weren't really thinking about this could be addictive. This could be. Did anybody ever talk to you when they were prescribing Oxycontin and then fentanyl about the addictive properties of these drugs?
No, it's, the surgeon, he probably just said, "Give Mr. Jackson, he's gonna have severe pain," right? So then in comes the doctor who manages pain at Mass General or Harvard, and they started me on the regimen.
What kind of state were you in during that time? And how long were you on the painkillers for?
I felt I was fine. I'm a painter, I'm an artist, and at that point, I'm painting, I'm trying to get myself back to something of normalcy. I spent 11 months at Mass General, came home, had to go back for emergency surgery to remove my left leg. So I was back for another 3 months, and then I'm back home again. I was just trying to get myself back to some sense of normalcy. I was taking the drugs because, they were prescribed. The tragic thing on the drug side of it, on the prescribed side, is once the surgeons and everybody at Mass General prescribed all this, and they watched me on a daily basis, okay, because I was there. But once I came back to Lynchburg, Virginia, my family doctor never got a phone call from anybody at Mass General and saying, "How's Mr. Jackson doing?" I never got a phone call from him. Do you think it's time that he starts to wean off of these opioids? Can you give him Motrin or give him Tylenol? We never heard. And then on my personal physician side, he never once approached it. I find that to be disappointing. He knew that I was
Right.
absolutely addicted. And there's some doctors would say, "Oh, you're dependent." I say, "Yeah, you tell me the difference."
Did you know you were addicted?
Oh, absolutely.
How did you know?
I had an intolerance for even this time between switching patches. Sometimes it would take 2 to 3 hours for the transdermal medication to get into my capillaries and get into my system. I would maybe have 1 to 2 hours of hell,
When you say hell, what do you mean?
screaming pain for 12 to, well, the longest one was 27 hours of screaming into a towel.
And the pain was isolated to the areas where you had your surgery, or was it all over?
I guess it would be the tract of the nervous system that was damaged. And it's incredible. Okay. Now, the surprising thing was after I decided I got this message, that I needed to end this stuff, I was very fearful of the residual pain. I was very fearful. So as I tapered myself off and began this process, I was very surprised that I had no pain. I had basically healed unknowingly. It's a crazy thing because just months before I started to taper off, talking to pharmacists in my area about going to other doctors to get the prescriptions filled because I had thought my doctor would eventually just stop filling the prescription. And then I was also looking at street fentanyl and cocaine and heroin.
You were.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, what made you do that? Do you think it was just your state of mind in addiction? Because here you are, in your 60s, it's somebody least likely to go to the streets, right? An educated person, I mean, all these things. And that's, I
Yeah,
think, is hard for people to understand. I think what's hard for people to understand is how someone goes from the prescription pills to the streets. And I know people get cut off and they feel desperate, right?
that's right. It's a rainy day that you're planning for. You're always in fear that the doctor is going to cut you off because what your body's saying to you, and regardless of pain or no pain, let's just say I had no pain, but I knew that my brain was telling me I needed more fentanyl. When I realized that there was a way to get even more dosages than I was authorized, and I'll tell you that is that I asked my pharmacist, is what's the earliest point that I could renew this prescription? And he said, if you get the prescription to us 3 days before, we can fill it. So you take that over 7 years. I had a quite storage of hydromorphine, Oxycontin, and fentanyl patches, probably 50 fentanyl patches, 300 to 400 pills, and on the gabapentin, probably 1,000 over that time that I was able to store away. So we need to change the rules that the insurance companies pay will authorize the renewal of that prescription 3 days before. Well, people like me that's terminally facing these pain medications, we can circumvent a lot of the policies and procedures and find ourselves hoarding drugs for those rainy days. So when I quit, I have a huge stockpile of medication just to prove to me that I did it.
Now, today we hear about people getting fentanyl who aren't seeking fentanyl. It's in every illicit drug, we know that. But we also hear more and more common the addiction to fentanyl itself, that people are just seeking fentanyl. And I think
Right.
that's hard for the rest of us to understand because why would you want something that could kill you? But I bet it's easy for you to understand.
Yeah, I think the essence, let's go right to the cartel issuance of fentanyl. I really don't believe that the cartel wants to kill anybody. They want to get you addicted.
That's what the DEA says. That's what the
Right.
DEA says.
They don't care that a few of us have fallen off the charts and died from it. The majority of them, of the users of that fentanyl, are addicted to it and they continue to return to it. It's just that easy and powerful of a drug that you don't get the high. You don't get the euphoric high. You get a feeling of, I think, total relaxation. You feel good. Some people say they get a little depressed when they take it. They get slowed down, that kind of stuff. I never felt that. The only time I felt that I was euphoric is every time I would take a morphine hit when I was in the hospital. That really set me good. Okay. But when I got to the fentanyl patch and the other drugs, I guess I accumulated such a tolerance to it that never really kicked in anymore about having this euphoric feeling. So I just kept on, just kept going and going and going.
Neil grappled with an opioid addiction for more than 7 years. He was ready to start searching for drugs off the street when he experienced a life-changing moment.
There was one day there that I had a whisper in my heart, and it's an emotional whisper. That whisper said, "Neil, you need to end the use of your drugs," because I had been in such a depressed state that life had no meaning. I would look around. My family's not here. My wife's working. My children are gone. But I would think about all those pieces of my life, and God stepped in, and here I am, right?
I want you to tell me about the day that you decided that you had to get off these drugs. Tell me more about that day.
All right. Well, this is a political day to some people. I was very bored sitting here by myself trying to recover. My wife's working. My kids are gone. Turned on the television, and as a bored old man, I went to C-SPAN. It was a celebration in the Rose Garden of the White House of the most recently elected president in 2017, which was Donald Trump. And at the beginning of his presidency, unbeknownst to me, he had ordered Chris Christie to head the study of the opioid alcoholic addiction problem in the United States, honor of his brother Fred, who had died of addiction. So I listened to it. And then I went to my screen and I downloaded the national report to the presidency. And President Biden has done a similar report. Probably a year ago, it came out. And it really scared the hell out of me. That's when God spoke in my heart that's exactly the same time that heart whisper came into me that I needed to get off. And after reading the report, I called my wife, told her what I'd done in my excitement during the day. And she says, "What are you going to do?" I said, "Well, those bastards were talking to me. I've got to quit." But I said, "It's a very emotional thing." I said, "I believe God spoke to me that I need to get off." And the reason I keep saying that God spoke to me goes back to when I was first diagnosed with, it was terminal and it was incurable chondrosarcoma. Okay. Very rare positioning. It was a huge task. This is a true statement by Dr. Francis Hornacek out of Mass General, Harvard. 1 in 1 million chance of surviving surgery. And so when I walked in, I knew it was going to roll out. I would never walk again. And he asked me, he said, "What do you think about that?" And I said, "Well, I'll tell you what I told Dr. Thompson when he gave me the diagnosis." I said, "I don't hear any bad news." And I'm going to get a little emotional with you. But I said, "I don't hear any bad news." I said, "I believe if I'm fortunate enough to come through the surgery, God will have a mission for me."
Neil believes that the mission started the day he committed to recovery. The truly unique aspect lies in how he was able to break free from the grip of drug use over 14 months.
My professional practice is in risk analytics. risk tolerance and that kind of stuff. So I'm always afraid of taking things so quickly without evaluating what are the impacted risks that's going to possibly accumulate themselves or come at me right away. So when I thought about getting off the drugs, I figured I had to study the options. The options were alternative medication, which at some point in time, when do you get off of that? I had to make that decision. And the other one was rehabilitative services. And I rejected that because I had just come out of, 14 months of hospitalization where everybody controlled everything. I didn't want to give up any more control than I'd lost before. So I said, well, what do you do? And I said, well, I looked at this thing called a fentanyl patch.
If you're not familiar with a fentanyl patch, it's prescribed by doctors for those who are in severe pain. The patch is placed on the skin to deliver a specific dose of fentanyl.
And I said, well, you come up with a way and you say, okay, if I can just cover 10% of that patch, 5%, 10%, and slowly taper myself off, in the technical terms, titrate yourself off, then you can do that. So all along those time periods, I recorded the impact, and the impacts were nothing. I had regained my health. I had stopped being depressed. I lost any migraine headaches. They went away. My eyes had glaucoma in them. That went away. I was no longer nauseated. That took over, 12, 14 months. And then when I got off, there was no sense of, I want some more. I want to go back to it.
After seeing life-changing success with his homemade device, Neil couldn't help but wonder if it held the key to helping others find their way to recovery. So he took a bold step.
When I got this idea and an engineer told me it would help somebody else, I came home that day and I wanted to validate what he had just told me. So I wrote a letter to Francis Collins at NIH, and I sent it to him because he was in that presentation with Trump. So I said, that's the connection. So I wrote to him and I emailed it to him. And this is crazy, but 20 minutes on the dot, my cell phone lit up and it was a 202 area code, which is Washington. I hesitated, but I answered it. And it was a woman who worked for Dr. Collins. And she said, are you Neil Jackson? I said, yes. She said, would you please hold for Dr. Collins? And I said, sure. And she says, he's only got 10 minutes, but he wants to talk to you. You just sent him a letter. I said, yes, I did. So he got on. We talked for 40 minutes. He gave me the greatest encouragement by this statement. He said, Neil, he said, I'm calling you because I received your letter. He said, I've never received a letter from a patient to end an epidemic in the United States ever before. And he says, you're going to do this. He says, but I'm going to tell you, I'm going to give you Dr. Montoya at NIDA as your mentor. He's my deputy there. And he says, I'm going to instruct him that he's going to walk you through this so that it gets to the FDA and gets approved. And I said, well, what do I need to do? And he said, well, first thing, you got to change it. You call it a tool. And he says, nobody in the medical business understands tools. So he says, you're going to change that word to device. You'll get respect. And then he says, you're going to patent it before you send anything to us. Because he said, if you send it to us in its raw form, he says, somebody will steal it. So I spent the next probably 9 months in patent trademark law offices. And I've got a really fantastic patent lawyer who's fully experienced in medical devices. So we've got 3 patents on it. The patent lawyer, of course, the patents are always the same as if they've never seen anything like that, They've seen, but in this case, they said they've never seen anything like this.
Neil says he received a similar reaction during a pre-submission meeting with the Food and Drug Administration. The device, named Fenblock, is currently undergoing FDA assessment. And so what is the process to get FDA approval?
It's really tough and it's expensive. You're looking at the inventor, you're looking at the investor. I've spent a lot of money interviewing attorneys. Their cost is extraordinary, in the thousands of dollars an hour to just get my submission in for classification of the drug. Fenblock, would it be class 1, class 2, class 3, based on how FDA evaluates risk, would be about $40,000. I was able over the course of years to find a woman who had just lost her job as a medical device submitter. for a major company. So I brought her on board and we're able to get that through at a lot less cost.
Have you run trials? Have you had others use it?
The reason I can't do that until I just had a addiction medical doctor in Arizona ask for samples. And I never knew that the FDA controls me as a producer, but the doctors coming to me now, part of my advisory team, are saying to me is we can get samples out from you and we can implement them as samples. There's no liability for the doctor. There's no liability on me. So late in the game, we're working on just what you're talking about. It'll work. There's no doubt it'll work.
And I think that if it works, then it needs to be expedited, right? Because there are many, many people that could benefit from this and it could save lives.
Yeah, that's what we're going to meet. I've got a meeting with Congress and we're going to talk about two things, the fentanyl test strip and then the thing called Fenblock. So I got four doctors that are on my advisory team. They're all saying we got to go under either emergency use or right to try. So I've got my congressman on notice and we've talked to him and we're working with him, so this is in the fundamental stages, but they did it for COVID and COVID wasn't tested on humans until it got out in the public. I don't worry about that. You can't hurt yourself with this thing. It's no drugs. You can't overdose. You can only underdose. And if you underdose, well, then kick it back a little bit, settle yourself down, and then begin your tapering off a little bit, a little later, so you feel good.
Yeah.
So you can't hurt yourself with it.
In addition to Fenblock, Neil is also working on devices to help those battling heroin and cocaine addictions.
To get off of heroin, for example, you use Suboxone, all right? And that comes in a patch. So you take that principle of a patch and you start applying. Well, what I've learned is very difficult time getting off of Suboxone, almost depressing to a point like you're trying to get off of fentanyl or you're trying to get off of heroin. It's a tough road. So it's already authorized to be in patches and you can find it. Your doctors can prescribe it. And then once you get on the Suboxone, it gives your brain the chance to heal. And then, okay, let's just say you're on Suboxone for a year. So what? All right. At the time of the year comes up, you want to start to taper off of that Suboxone 6 months out, whatever you and your doctor decide. Then you can go to the Narboc and wean yourself off over time.
So I see. It would be about the same thing as the fentanyl patch blocker, Fenblock. It would be for Suboxone. But what about cocaine then? Because Suboxone doesn't work on cocaine.
Well, you're going to have to look at other things. We've got the Ministry of Health in Canada. Canada is the only country near us that has already authorized the commercial production of cocaine. And they're in trouble. And when I talked to the Ministry of Health there 8-9 months ago, they're just waiting for me to get through FDA because they're excited with this opportunity to use cocaine in a patch and then wean the people off.
Oh, I see. So the cocaine would be administered through a patch. That's how it
Right.
would work. I see. Okay. Makes sense.
Let's say we got some street users that come into our harm reduction centers and they get a hit, they get a shot. Well, what are you going to do about that? So we give them a shot and then give them a patch. If they want to continue on, they'll manage themselves to your policy, which is you use the patch, and then we'll start to wean you off of the patch. If they want to violate that, then you just shut the door on them.
So you talked about how it took you 14 months to wean yourself off using your own invention and how much better you felt, how all these health issues cleared up. How are you feeling today? How are you doing now?
Very, very good. Thank you for asking. It's a great life now because it's turned my whole direction around. I feel really good. I have my days that I have phantom pain. You can't get rid of that. I don't care what drug when I was on all the other drugs, I still have phantom pains. Once they amputated a leg, your brain says, where's the leg? You can feel pain in your toes and they're not even there. So that's a Motrin Tylenol solution. But other than that, and that only occurs when, this is crazy, but that only occurs when weather changes.
Interesting. I think it's just amazing. The entire story is amazing. Everything that you went through and then to come up with something like this and then to pursue it. That's where a lot of people would have even dropped the ball because it's so hard to get something new through.
Well, right now I'm into $250,000.
Wow.
Now that it's in the FDA, I think that when I look for capital, it's a little better because they know it's there. Okay. They know that I've taken it the right steps. And it's taken me a while because I've had to really steal out of my retirement funds at that point.
Yeah. Well, thank you for what you're doing to try to help other people through this product. And I wish you all the best of success with it. And I really appreciate you sharing the story with me today on the podcast.
Well, I tell you, I'm doing this for you and for Emily
Oh,
and for those that are out there. I can only send to you, Angela, is my love. You know, God teaches me different things every minute. This is one of the most important minutes. And I thank you so much. We'll fix this problem. And I feel so bad. So my heart's out to you.
thank you.
Gratitude's greatly to you and your family.
Well, thank you for your compassion and your empathy and for all the hard work you're doing to try to help others. Really appreciate it. Thank you, Neil.
Thanks.
Thank you for spending your time to learn about one of the most critical issues gripping our nation today, the deadly drug epidemic. Join us again next week for an eye-opening conversation with the man who inspired Michael Keaton's character in the Emmy Award-winning series, Dope Sick.
It's kind of weird to see it on TV. He won an Emmy for it. I tell people all the time, as my running joke is, that he was a hack before he got my role. And, I shot him to start him. Obviously, Batman wasn't anything. So.
Dr. Stephen Lloyd not only serves as the real-life inspiration for the hit series, but also works tirelessly every day to help those battling substance use disorder and reduce the stigma surrounding the disease. Hear how he's truly making a difference in our compelling discussion. Thank you again for joining us. Until next time, wishing you faith, hope, and courage. This podcast is produced by Casey Wonnenberg King and Anna Fye.